Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome owner, Bar Magic, Tobin Ellis.
Hey, good morning. How are you? Well, welcome back to Las Vegas. A great week here at the 73rd annual WSWA. And now that you've got a real nice grasp of the global landscape of spirit trends and things related to that, now it's time to bring out a panel of sort of the frontline rock stars from mixologists and spirit specialists and wine experts who are actually out there selling in some of these key influencer accounts from all over the country, so we can dive a little deeper into why these trends pop up, how they travel around the world and in the country, and what value they can have for you as you explore what you're going to be doing with your brands and with your customers. So with no more ado, let's bring them out one at a time here. I've got 4 panelists for me from all over the country. First gentleman I'm going to bring out has managed wine programs at Michelin-starred restaurants and award-winning restaurants, including at the St. Regis in San Francisco, Tom Colicchio's Craft in Los Angeles, and also won a Wine Spectator Grand Award as the wine director at Gary Danko's. Please welcome the wine director from Erna's Elderberry House Restaurant in Northern California, Mr. Jeff Anderson. Come on, you guys can make some more noise than that. We're on the last couple days here. It's the home stretch. The next gentleman I'm going to bring out runs 3 esteemed programs in Washington, D.C., including at the Mockingbird Hill, Eat the Rich, Southern Efficiency, and also the twice James Beard-nominated Columbia Room. He is on the board of directors for the Tequila Interchange Project and a judge at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Please give another warm welcome from Washington, D.C. drink company, Mr. Derek Brown. And I get a quick here. And I got to get, whoop. Quick hello, didn't mean to leave you out there. Very clumsy, don't worry, I'll probably fall 3 times today. Next out, I'd like to bring from Boston, Massachusetts. This gentleman's had 20 years behind the bar and also in director positions with the Ritz-Carlton, Starwood Hotels. He is the former president of the Boston chapter of the United States Bartenders Guild. He is the director of mixology and spirits education for the Martinetti Companies. Please welcome my friend, Mr. Troy Clark. What's up, brother? And the anchorman from right here in Las Vegas, Nevada, working, he's another 20-year hospitality veteran who has been a bartender at the acclaimed Vesper Bar right here in the Cosmopolitan Hotel. He's a certified specialist of spirits, and he works on about 6 billion beverage programs a week, working for Breakthrough Beverage right here in Las Vegas with all of the casinos and on-premise properties. Please welcome from Breakthrough Beverage, beverage development specialist, Mike Doyle. All right, gentlemen, let's dive right into it. So we heard about some of the landscape in terms of the statistics and where the trends are going, where they're numbering, but let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the front lines that may or may not correlate with this, so we can figure out how do we make sense of what is coming next or what we should be doing with what we're seeing now. So let's start sort of with something broad. These trends, do they come from, where are they coming from? Is it changing? In other words, let's start with, are we looking at social media as a strongest influence, or is it really what's happening with bartenders on the bars and sommeliers and things that's actually driving these trends, or how do they intersect?
Well, I think one of the things and important distinctions to make is that, some of us, me in particular, have very tiny bars. We have bars that, in terms of what we purchase, the purchasing power is not very big at all. And a lot of what we hope is out there in the world is aspirational. I have a sherry bar. That means that we push that in the world because we love it, because it's something important to us. And certainly it's become a little bit of a trend, but it hasn't hit the mainstream wide. I'm sure that sherry didn't even touch on the statistics earlier. But it's something that's important to us. So I think that there is that distinction of what people are driving it and trying to put things that they're passionate about, things that they love. And there's also the mainstream at large.
And Jeff, what about in wine? I mean, is it the same? Do you kind of agree with Derek, or do you see something different? I mean, who's pushing what varietals you're going to be selling next week, next month, next year?
Things are changing a lot in the wine world, and I think it's a little bit different than some of the craft bar movement, cocktail movement, in the sense that people are very empowered by social media, especially millennials. They're able to to give me more information than I've ever had coming back at me as a sommelier, as a wine expert. And it's become much more of a meeting in a middle ground, as it were, and a really interactive experience, I think, that I think people have fun with, but it's changing a lot as far as how trends are being pushed. I think there's still a lot of influence from journalists, from sommeliers, wine experts, wine people on the floor, but a lot of it is coming from word of mouth and social media as well.
Well, and you use the word interactive, and it's funny because we were talking backstage about how it's a very different world now. We can't really get away with pushing the trends we think we want to see happening, because what's happening is people are pulling out their phones and they're calling everyone out on these things. You've got
Right.
people's grandmothers that are talking to you about what's going on with malolactic fermentation at the table, and you've
Right.
got to be able to deal with that and answer it. And they know really what is out there in social media and in the journalistic world. But what about, let's talk a little bit about maybe how these trends travel regionally. I mean, are we seeing, what are some things that you guys, let's get right into it. What are you seeing right now from categories or super geeky specific spirits or cocktails that are driving specific categories or spirits, or the same in the wine world? What is popping up on your radar in your cities? Let's start right on the East Coast in Boston and just kind of move around the country.
Well, I think you touch on a good point. One of the things that we see is, we were talking earlier backstage about how gin, since 2000, it kind of started to grow. But it's taken 16 years to get mainstream, and people are starting to care about how many gins are on their back bar and maybe less flavored vodkas. So on the East Coast, I'm seeing, more fortified wines, vermouth, definitely some sherry. Mezcal is huge in mainstream accounts coming up, and gin. Those are some areas that I really see growing. Maybe not on the radar on the trend right now, but definitely is starting to hit mainstream accounts and chain restaurants.
Sure, and that I think we are sometimes. It's like we're doing something that's ahead of the trend, but the numbers take a while to catch up. Yeah. So we see the Irish whiskey right now and the hard ciders and things, and the return to RTDs, but still these boutique things are happening, and we know that that's sort of an indicator of probably of what's to come, at least regionally, if not nationally and globally. Derek, in DC, what are you seeing? Same thing?
Well, I think everything he said for sure. Fortified wines, vermouths, and this sort of I don't know how to call this, but the Italianization of Amaros. Amaros popping up in Charleston, South Carolina, in Washington, D.C. So you see all these wine, kind of unique regional products showing up. That's pretty cool. And definitely rye whiskey continues to go up. I mean, it's I forget the exact statistic, but it's something like 500% higher sales as of late. So I mean, it's crazy. And rye whiskey is huge. We have right in our backyard a craft distiller making rye whiskey, and everybody in the Maryland area, because obviously Maryland was once a historic area for rye whiskey. They're starting to rush to build distilleries and have rye whiskey, a Maryland rye whiskey. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how about right here on the West Coast or left coast here? What
left
about?
Coast.
Yep.
I mean, right here in Vegas, just a couple weeks ago, we had the arena open up, and we're seeing a 20,000 seat arena whose cocktail program revolves around craft cocktails, pushing out those champion cocktails, the mojito, the margarita, and then with brown spirits doing Manhattans and old fashions. That's front and center at the T-Mobile really high profile arena. Even in the nightclubs where we're seeing commitments with time and resources to try to include what was always kind of on the fringe, these craft cocktails, putting those on the menu and figuring out the systems to get those in front of what we refer to as the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. It is mainstream. In fact, I was at the Guns N' Roses show, and we're looking at a beverage program now where on opening night when they had the Killers, got back to me that it was a 90-10 P-mix from spirited cocktails to beer and wine at an arena in America. I mean, that's unheard of.
I just got chills. That's amazing.
It's just insane. And it's partially because what they're elevating, and that is what they're elevating. And one way they're elevating, and we know this is a big trend, it's not news to anyone in the room, but what's happening with it is probably something we could talk about for a minute. Let's talk a little bit about craft on draft, because that's a huge trend, and a lot of the national accounts are looking at this. Pretty much everyone that's wanting to maximize margins and look at increased velocities in sale and revenue, and also just establishing their brand as somewhere to go to be a place to get craft, is looking at craft on draft. What are you guys seeing out there? And we can also quickly tie in wine on tap, because that's a very new world that is starting to take some ground. What are you guys are seeing in this draft world outside of beer?
I mean, I see resorts, beach resorts, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, where I'm working on, and they're realizing at the beach they want to give a higher quality drink, higher quality cocktail, and reaching out to us to set up draft cocktails right there on the beach to be able to do things with, citrus margaritas faster, and maybe some more innovative drinks that would take more steps, be able to put a higher quality drink out while on the beach. So we're definitely seeing people wanting to, in resorts, huge resorts, wanting to do this. It is definitely a trend that is moving forward, and I don't think it's going to get any weaker. It's going to only get stronger.
And it's working.
And it's working.
Sure.
It's not just in the experimental stages and in the boutique-y, geeky cocktail accounts. We're seeing it hit kind of mainstream.
You're more of the expert on draft cocktails, so.
Well, I think that with the mainstream wanting these, like I said earlier, the champion cocktails, we're seeing more cocktails on tap via a draft system or a batch system. Whether you do it on tap or you're just batching out cocktails and the bartender's finishing it like a la minute in front of the guest, you're seeing more attention to the execution of that, the proper execution, using great ingredients, fresh juices, and then we're pulling away from the culinary world with different mechanisms to make a better product available to more people in a condensed amount of time. Lots of focus is going in on that, and I think that that's really important that it gets executed correctly. Otherwise, it's going to fall flat.
Yeah, and T-Mobile Arena is the first arena, I think, to put a full, the whole property, every bar has craft on draft, correct? Close to it?
I'm close to it, and then the ones that don't have it, they have instituted platforms and training platforms that the bartenders know exactly how to make it and execute it. It's already batched. They're just finishing it off right in front of the guest.
Gotcha.
But it's incredible.
I've seen something else that's happened in terms of the craft on draft, which is a great term. Yeah. But also bottled cocktails. So you're starting to see, obviously it takes, as you were alluding to, it takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of training to get somebody to the point where they can make a really excellent cocktail. And so how do you do that in a large, and plus it takes a lot of time to make that cocktail. So how do you do that quickly and with less skill? And I think that craft on draft is one option. The other, bottled cocktails, where you could simply put it in a bottle, pop it open, pour it over ice and serve it. So I guess that falls into the RTD category a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. It's a return to RTDs. What was it? 20 years ago, a canned beer we all loved it, but it was a crappy beer. Now there's amazing beer. All great beers come in cans. Yeah. And the return to RTD. And I think what you're all really referring to is we're looking at how, your portfolios and how distributors can help operationalize this movement. That's right. And that's when it gets exciting, and that's when the velocities are there, is what can we do to, and not even just the obvious operationalization, thank you, making it work, but also really look at things like quarterly turnover. And the staff training that would have to go in 5 and 10 years ago to be able to execute these programs, people don't want that anymore. They want to go, how do I get my bartenders to pull a lever and have that fresh drink? And then what does that do but possibly elevate this base spirit that has to go in that? No one's going to put all that effort and money and time into doing this fresh craft cocktail, on draft or not, and throw in rock gut bottom well liquor. So that's a really good sign for all of us and a trend. What about the wine world and wine?
Well, and I think it goes hand in hand. I think there's the perception of tap wine is just keeps going up and up and up, and the freedom to allow. I think people are, wanting to drink different amounts. They don't want to be stuck in glass or half bottle, full bottle. In some sense, there's a lot more creativity that can go on as far as pouring it into vessels and flexibility as far as what is on tap now, and you can have. There's a wide variety, and there's also some really nice relationships that are being formed by wine people, sommeliers, restaurants that are directly working with wineries, distributors, importers to do something special through tap, wine on tap,
and
which is
the
pretty
consumer's
amazing.
responding better to it.
And people are responding wonderfully to it. At least, I find that definitely in the cities, but it seems to be just growing.
Yeah, and you put something on tap too, especially if it's new. If it's wine or a cocktail, and not only do they respond better to it, but you see the velocities of that go through the roof.
Yeah.
People get excited to try it. And of course, now you can sample, where you couldn't sample.
That's the other. And the preservative is a big trend in wine with things like wine on tap, but also Coravan, various ways to really preserve wine, which is revolutionizing.
Talk to us about a couple wines real quick, or categories in wine, or that whole world that you're seeing that you see on the front lines that are starting to get exciting. And
well, I think there's an idea of authenticity, and I think I kind of see the natural wine movement kind of peaking out, but I think what people are wanting are authentic wines, and sometimes that's, whether that's a small production, it's something that people believe in. I think the millennials are looking for really nice, great value, but also they like that authenticity, whether it's packaging, whether it's history, whether it's stories. I think I'm seeing that as a big trend, and that goes hand in hand, I think, with.
How's Rosé All Day doing?
And then Rosé is just going to get bigger and bigger. I think Rosé is growing. I think lower alcohol wines are a big part of what's going on right now. Sparkling wines, and I think what we're going to see is more and more. I mean, Prosecco is obviously very popular, but things domestic sparklers, things from the south of France like Crémant de Limoux, Cava. I think those are all sparkling wines that are going to do really well at that price point, and the quality has gone way up. But that's an exciting part of the wine.
All right, real quick, lightning round here in the cocktail world and the spirit world, either one, spirits or cocktails. Specific trends, drinks, things that are driving the spirit sales or moving the trends, moving the chains down the field. What are you seeing?
Brown spirits and Manhattans and old fashions are, with American whiskey, is absolutely exploding right now. It's something, it's about a 2-year lag from what we all enjoyed a couple of years ago is getting a lot of traction.
I heard something the other day on social media that the old fashioned is the new cosmopolitan.
Yeah, literally, I've been to an account where they didn't have room in their speedwell for the ingredients for their house old fashioned. It's literally sitting next to the register at each POS station.
They need a Tobin Ellis Perlick cocktail station. I think that would have solved that there. Only shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
Sorry, but yeah. So Troy, what do you got?
I think one big trend is club service gin and tonic, raising the level for gin and tonic. I've seen a huge increase in bottled tonics, and then elevating that to like that Spanish gin and tonic look, really upping it with fresh herbs. You're going to see now more than ever, chefs and bartenders are becoming equal in that sense of what's going on in the kitchen is going on in the front of the house, and you're seeing a lot of those no waste. So what are you using? Oh, I'm going to use that in this drink. Oh, there's some of this. Let me put some of that and make it look nice. You drink with your eyes. The experience has got to taste good, and it brings everything full circle. So that's a huge, huge trend.
Yeah, and you mentioned something, speaking of the kitchen and the bar, when we were talking backstage a little bit, that was really interesting, that it's a trend maybe that's not on most people's radars, about how it's changing really the real estate in clubs, bars, and restaurants. What's happening? What's different than it was just a few years ago that you noticed we had kind of all said we were seeing?
What we're seeing is we're seeing things that you're doing in your bar every day. It's exciting what's happening behind the bar. 25 years ago, people were getting excited about what the chef was doing and want to be in the kitchen. We are even seeing a bar now where you can sit behind the bar and you have like a chef's table, but for a bar. There's a trend there that it is more in demand now at a bar seat than anywhere else in the restaurant. Restaurants could sit empty and the bar is packed. Because of what's going on.
At the Columbia Room, we have, it's basically a tasting menu. You go in and it's cocktails paired with snacks. And there's not a single bottle behind the bar. And everything is almost plated, the way it's presented. So that garnish game that you mentioned, that's really become big. I would add to the trend thing, craft sodas. If you look at some of the most popular cocktails and drinks, really mixed drinks, you mentioned gin and tonics. Moscow Mules, I know that we had talked about that at some point, ginger beer. So all of these are going into it, and that's also a great way to make quick and delicious cocktails. So.
Yes, and also I think too we're seeing, speaking about the low proof idea, the inverted formulas, and those are catching on. They see all these amazing cocktails and they want to try them, but they can't have 10 cocktails and get in their car and drive home or do any work or anything. So now we're seeing where we're flipping formulas. So that gives opportunities for some of these modifier spirits that were never getting the front and center attention. They can be the star, and we can take an orange modifier and make that the primary spirit in a margarita and pull the tequila back. And it gives people the opportunity to sample that flavor in something that's more accessible, that will pull them in and move on. So I think, cocktail flight sampling, anything that allows them to get closer to the bar and interact with all of the bartenders and the spirits and all the beautiful mise en place is something that's driving this total change to what you were talking about earlier is craft. Right. And that's the real interesting conversation in our circles now. And I know you guys were listening to it before. What is craft? And talking about things like authenticity, locality, talking about heritage. That's interesting because the number of distilleries that have popped up in the US alone in the last 5 years has been on an exponential curve. Not all of them have any heritage whatsoever. Right. So what are you seeing when you're looking now at bringing in a new spirit to your bar and you're going to stick it back there in that coveted real estate? It's a whiskey that hasn't been around for 100 years or a scotch that hasn't been around for 250 years or anything else. What are you looking at?
It's funny because what Jeff said earlier about authenticity, I feel like that's part of it, but authenticity no longer means heritage, as you were saying. Like, it's just people want the real story. You know, for a long time we were pushing story, story, story. We just want a story behind it. Now they want the real story behind it. The people who make it, the trouble that they go through to bring it to market, and all of that. It doesn't have to be 100 years old. What it has to be is someone, a maker, making it.
But I think there's something really important about all this, and that what we forget is just because you're local or you're small doesn't mean you're good. And that's a really, really important thing. Big isn't bad, okay? Because big has been doing it great for a long time, potentially. Not all, but some are great. And I think what it is what I see more is people are coming in and they're fiending for education. And we're tasting things blind to understand we have great palates. And let's take everything out of it and try it. And is the juice really good? Right? And if it's good, then let's understand it more. Because that I'm seeing a lot more of people coming into my bar and my training center and understanding what does the liquid taste like and what am I going to do with it before I tell you what it is and can I identify it? And that's, I think, an important part of craft and authenticity is understanding, do I actually know how to make that spirit? Do I know how to use my still? And can I make a good product that's going to sustain? And that's what we look at is the product sustainable? Does it taste good? Do people like it? Because if they don't and it doesn't taste good, no matter how good the story is and no matter how cool you are, it's not going to sell.
Are you seeing a lot more ability in your costs and to be able to play with price points and be able to drive higher ticket items because of all this? Or is it starting to stabilize out? Because this isn't new. We've been doing this now for 10, 15 years in bars all over the country. But what's happening with that? How is it impacting your operations when you make those buying decisions to bring in a new brand or to switch something out or et cetera?
Yeah, for me, we had, I guess it used to be that $12 cocktails were quite expensive, but that's gone away. I mean, now it's very common to have $16 to $18 cocktails, and that's based on the base spirit that you're choosing. Obviously you can't get away with charging $12 if you're using something very expensive. So I've definitely seen that increase. And with that, the services around it have to increase as well in bars. So it means that certain bars are getting a little more high-end, and the glassware is a little more unique or special. And obviously the mixers are correspondingly high-end.
But I think it depends on where you go with that. I mean, mainstream is not raising their prices. There's a threshold.
Sure.
So, to your establishment or a fine dining restaurant, you can push that if you can give the experience. But if you go into your normal mom and pop's restaurant or a chain restaurant, there is a threshold that they will not go over with drinks. It has to fit into that. No matter how great the liquid is, it just may not fit into the program because of cost.
It's mainstream. Let's talk about 35 to 50 million tourists coming to Vegas every year. What are the casinos doing? What are they accepting? What are they looking at? Are they opening up their thresholds for these kind of things? Or
well, the guests are more educated and curious than ever. And so, to the point earlier when they're checking you out and confirming what you just said on their smartphone, these people are looking for an authentic experience. I know we keep on using that word, but I really think that that's what they're searching for is something interesting. We've been driving it home so long as I've been out here, I've been wanting people to drink. It's been about 6 years. I've just wanted people to drink something interesting. And now it's finally happening. And so the casinos are reacting, the nightclubs are reacting, all these huge high-profile properties are starting to realize that our consumers that are coming here aren't drinking necessarily as a vehicle for beverage alcohol. They're wanting to drink something interesting that has a story behind it that's been well made by a professional behind the bar. And all that comes down to ingredients, what spirits you're using, the story behind it, how it's prepared, and the training and how the bartender can speak to it. So the education has blown way past just being the bartender. Now it's gone into across the bar to the guest side. And these huge accounts have to embrace that, because otherwise they're going to get passed up by the guy right next door that's going to jump on it and start trying to put together a great cocktail program on a huge scale. You know, they just have to figure out the systems to implement that.
Sure. What is all this doing to wine? What is that wine space? Do you have to have conversations about these things now, or is it easier to have the conversation about wine and move people to a different wine while they're eating or hanging out? Or
I think it is. I think it is easier. I mean, it's you know, and we kind of talked about this backstage as far as I think, you know, with the rise of the kitchen and the rise of the craft movement, it's really put sommeliers and wine people in a different role because we're not necessarily creating things, we're curating, and we're having, and part of what we have is, it still goes back to what we're talking about, the knowledge and that kind of interaction with the guests, which is becoming more and more important from my, you know, the wine standpoint, but I think all across the board, is our people are looking for that. And so that is, you know, definitely changing quite a bit.
And I have an admission to make. I use wine in cocktails.
Well, and that's what you're talking about.
Oh, I knew it was going to get off.
yeah.
And that's kind of gone back and forth. I mean, I'll do some little things for tasting menus that are essentially cocktails, but wine-based, and vice
taking
versa.
each other's job.
And the rise of, you know, I mean, we talked about it, you know, rooting for sherry and Madeira and fortified, you know, spirits like, or fortified wine spirits like vermouth or port.
All right, well, thank you. Well, we're going to take some questions from you guys in just a second here. One last thing, real fast. What's the next it cocktail? What are you seeing? Real quick, what do you got, Derek?
I think the continued rise of the old fashioned.
Okay.
And new takes on things like bourbon and Coke. You know, like some of the old stuff that was, you know, was considered simplistic. Now
old-fashioned bourbon and Coke. What do you got?
Highball, Collins, reinventing it, super plug and play, easy.
Great. Doyle?
Daiquiri.
Daiquiri?
Is going to, nice and simple. 3-ingredient cocktails.
Banana daiquiri. The banackery.
Banackery.
As you said. Great. Okay, let's take some questions. Let's hear what's on your mind. Who's got questions for our panelists? Cocktails, wine, trends. What do you need to know? Sir.
Or just big beer?
Interesting.
Sorry, we talked a lot about wine on tap and craft cocktails, and I was just wondering from the panel, do we think it's all beer that's losing, or just big beer?
I don't think beer's losing at all. I think we're adding taps. I mean, I do installations. That's what I do, is hospitality design. Starbucks, hotels, all over the world. And we're not talking about taking a beer on tap to put wine or cocktails on tap. We're trying to get everything we can on tap to operationalize, to be more profitable and elevate for the guest. So I don't know that beer's losing, but that's my take.
In Eat the Rich, which is our oyster bar, for the first time, we reduced some of our beer space and the taps to put in craft cocktails. So quite literally in that case, in this small example,
you had to.
Beer lost.
Yeah, in an existing operation, sure.
Yeah.
What else, guys? What are you seeing?
I mean, I see a little bit of that too. I think the space itself is what's maybe shrinking a little bit, but I still think there's beer sales are I don't think they've gone down at all. I don't think it's at an expense, but just a different way of presentation.
Maybe a little cannibalization. Great question. Who else has a question for our panelists? Miss. Hi, Sherry.
Hey. Craft seems to be the buzzword these days. What factors do you consider when taking on a new craft brand for your restaurant or your bar?
I think we started to touch on that, and that is a really important question because, you know, what is craft? Is craft what the consumer thinks it is, which is definitely a part of it? Is it, and what about the legalities? You know, we're looking at a lot of legal issues right now of what you can put on a label to describe how something's made and bottled. We all know about those stories, and those aren't new. We looked at those things when we dealt with the tequila issues 15, 16 years ago. So what do you guys, are your customers, are they bringing this up? Is it something that you have to have these conversations? Are you concerned more about the authenticity that you know of something that's craft? Or when you're running businesses, you've got numbers to produce. Is it about what the consumer thinks is craft? And where are we going to find our peace with that? And ultimately, the question is, how does that affect what you put on your back bar?
Well, you know, from my standpoint, from a distributor standpoint, you know, we look at, you know, there's about 600 craft distilleries. By 2020, there's going to be over 1,000, right? We also look at the segment when you're presenting that brand, regionality. How much do we have in this region? Is it a tequila? Is it a fortified wine? How much of their sales do we already existently have? What does this brand bring to the table? What is unique about it? How does it taste? Is the strength in the market sustainable to add another one in? And what percentage of share would that get? Where have you already been? And how have you done? Those are things. Do you have people in the market talking about this brand? Is it going to be viable? There are a lot of factors to go into when we decide taking on a new brand because it's a partnership. And we want to make sure that your brand's successful, but we want to make sure that we can do the job, right? And doing that. And I think there's a lot of things that go together. We don't just say yes to everything and no to everything. So.
Great. What about, let's talk on the operator side a little bit. So I know that, and that's...
I have kind of two questions when thinking about bringing on a new craft spirit. Is it really a craft spirit? And is it really good, right? So is it really a craft spirit? I mean, is their story just kind of, is it crap? Is it not true at all? Because you can see through that veneer pretty quickly. You just start going through, and if you can't find a maker, and you find a room of marketing professionals, then that's not a craft spirit, But obviously that weighs against, is it really good? Because I've come across spirits that generally have some kind of story that might not be 100% there, but they taste great. So you have to kind of weigh both of those things as we say, pride and money.
But that's a good point. If it tastes good, does the marketing matter?
Not really.
Yeah. Right? There's a give and take there. If the product is lights out great, but there's no maker and it's being purchased and blended, is there viability there because it tastes so great?
Yeah, and then you also have consumers coming into your bar that are saying, I want this or that brand, And so, Tito's is a great example. That's now just a call. People are like, I'll take Tito's, I'll take Tito's. And they see it as a craft brand.
I mean, and there's a brand that craft is what built Tito's, that whole notion of craft, and now it's coming back full circle, and it's something that we all have to have this discussion. What about the specifics? And we're dealing now with some legalities, and like I said, we've dealt with it with other categories. I mean, look at what's happening with tequila and mezcal now.
Yeah.
And some of the things going on in some of the legislation down there that's really affecting how these producers can label their products.
That's right.
And that's going to affect your ability to sell it. I mean, cachaça went through this, having to be labeled as rum, Brazilian rum for years, and how they had to fight that to be able to say this isn't rum, this is a different spirit. So
Scotch is going through that now with labeling issues and with Compass Box and being able to tell their story of everything that happens. There's a huge...
age statements and on and on and on.
Yes.
Sure. Great question. Who's got it? Sir, you had a question?
Yeah, for the wine on tap, is there a ceiling on the price point that the consumer will pay for a glass of wine?
I don't think so. I think it has been somewhat marketed as relatively speaking, lower priced while still it hits that sweet spot, kind of right around that $10. I think at least in cities, and people like that idea. I mean, there is a perception that they are getting value, so I think that's always going to be there. But I think, like I said, some of these new, there's a higher quality and there's some special relationships with restaurants or bars or that you're selling something very special on tap, and I think it can go up to 20, it can go up to 25, but I haven't seen that. I think it's moving that direction. Yeah.
More questions, Miss. Hi.
It's going to be, and some of that came out of history in Austria because, quite a few years ago there was a scandal, and that's happening. There's a recent study on alcohol levels in wines from the United States that are most of them are false. And so I think there is going to be more. I think you're going to see some of that. And even things like when you claim natural wine or some of these terminologies are going to come under, scrutiny, I think. But I don't know. I think it's going to take a bigger scandal like happened in Italy and Maltacino, or things like that, where you're really seeing where there's going to be a big upswell for that. That's what I see. But I think it is coming, because there's a lot of statements that may not be entirely accurate from producers. So.
Great. More questions? I want to leave this side of the room. Sir.
No one has mentioned cider, and I just wondered if it is a category today, and where do you see it 5-10 years ago? Will it be something tomorrow if it isn't today?
Well, I mean, 6% growth a year, one of the highest growth categories of anything. It's nothing we can ignore. I know I'm seeing it, and I'm always recommend to operators, if you're pushing any kind of a craft beer program, put a cider on top. Absolutely. Guys, are you?
Yeah. We definitely have ciders on tap. We try to go for something local, and we just happen to live in an area where we have lots of great ciders. So.
Yeah, I opened up a beer bar, rooftop beer bar, 4,000 square feet. We put a cider on tap. It became our number 2 selling in all of our PMIX right away. I mean, it was absolutely. But the quality didn't matter to us, and it didn't matter to our guests. It didn't affect the sales as much as it affected our positioning in the market for what we were selling. I think you put anything on a cider on tap, you're going to have success with that. That's what I've seen from the operator's side.
And I think it's like an entry point for a beer drinker that's not a beer drinker. Ciders are so approachable and so easy to drink, and that's why the growth is there too.
Speaking of beer, I want to thank IPA, just in general, the category, for making it easier to sell bitter cocktails. Thank you so much. That was great. Appreciate that. It's so easy to sell. Now, who else has a question for our panelists? We got time for a couple more. Sir.
Yeah, we're getting ready to start importing Baijiu, Chinese liquor. And it's the most consumed liquor in the world. They consume 11 billion liters a year. But it's pretty well unknown here. In China, you'd never even consider mixing it with something else. But the U.S. market is obviously different. What have you guys looked at getting into making cocktails or?
Well, I'm at the San Francisco the San Francisco World Spirits Competition every year, and Baijiu starts to creep in more and more. At one point there was one, and there was a couple, and now this last competition we all agreed it wasn't terrible. So it's one of those things where Baijiu is a specific taste profile, and I think that people are warming up to it, because so is mezcal, so is grappa. So there's lots of things like that, sake. So yeah, it is definitely making inroads, but they are tiny inroads right now. So
I would say the same. I did it at Ultimate Beverage Challenge this year, and we definitely saw the category. There was more entries into it. There was a friend of mine who was doing a master class on Baijiu in New York. It is definitely something I see growing, but it's a specific flavor profile that just takes some time for people to get accustomed to. It's not a tradition here of drinking that spirit, so it takes some time to. I mean, look, it took 16 years for people to drink gin.
There was a cocktail featuring Baijiu as the base spirit in the Call for Cocktails competition yesterday, which I thought was really interesting. It was probably one of the first times I've seen Baijiu being utilized in a cocktail, and it obviously had to make it through to the final round. So it was a great drink. It's called the Dragon Cool. So we'll see.
All right, one last question, anyone?
So speaking of the Dragon Cool, Go Thai International, right there with you with the Baijiu. Let's talk a little bit about the culture, though, with all spirits. How much of a role does that narrative play in that kind of development of a cocktail, what you use in your bars and in kind of your creations?
Who's got one answer for this, and then we'll wrap it up?
I'm not sure I understood the question entirely. I apologize.
So the culture of the drink.
Oh, I see. Yeah, absolutely. More and more, I think that that's part of that story, telling people where it comes from, the locality, not just being local, but where it comes from. And, telling a story around that. I think
the caipirinha sells cachaça, the pisco sour sells pisco, et cetera. I think that's kind of what you're saying, and absolutely. And I think as soon as you get those bottles in the hands of the mixologists and the bartenders, and they can start diving into the history and re-exploring those cocktails, people get excited about those stories, and we'll move some cases.
Well, we have a whole menu at the Columbia Room around Japanese spirits and flavors, and so we have using sochu and sake and ume and things like that. So I think it does connect to that, yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all for your time today, and if we could thank our panelists here You can thank Jeff, Derek, Troy, and Mike. Have a great day in Las Vegas, and I want to leave you with one little tidbit. I don't know how many people, I don't know how many years you've been coming here, but I just want you to know, in case you didn't, you know that Las Vegas, who knows what Las Vegas means? Anyone? Not one person in the room. Las Vegas means the meadows. You are in the meadows. It's a small meadow in the middle of the desert. So now when you leave and you go, you can tell people that one neat little fact that Las Vegas is the meadows. So enjoy the meadows. Have a great day. Hope to see you again next year. We'll see you in Orlando. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. If you want to come up and ask some questions, feel free. Thanks so much to my panelists. Thank you. Thank you, WSWA. Have a great, wonderful day.